Greetings, I'm Janet Small, and I'm the course, I don't know, you can't see me very well here, sorry. I'm the course development manager at SILT, and I'm here very, very thrilled to do the introduction for this particular webinar called The Potential of Universal Design for Learning, Dismantling Academic Ableism for Accessibility and Inclusion. And it's really, I'm just doing the intro because it's being put together and presented by my colleague, Benedict, who you've just been hearing from now, and I'll introduce him in a minute. But I wanted to just let you know a bit of background. So this webinar is attached and related to the project we're working on broadly. That's a 3-year project funded by the University Development Capacity Development Grant that's looking at redesigning blended learning courses in order to incorporate greater levels of inclusion and accessibility for students at GCT. So we're midway in the project, and there are Benedict and quite other members of the team, and members here are from our team who are working with us as educational technology advisors. And Benedict himself, who will be running the webinar, is somebody who's been an EdTech advisor on our project for more than a year, so he's pretty experienced. And he himself is a disability researcher and a humanitarian. He has 3 postgraduate qualifications in social development, social anthropology, and disability studies, and he's busy with another postgrad qualification in disability studies. So he's very, very passionate about inclusion and accessibility for students, and based on his own personal experience. And I'm not going to take up any more time, but I'm going to hand over to Benedict to introduce the webinar and the really exciting lineup of guests he's got to work with us today. Thanks, Benedict. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Janet. Good afternoon, colleagues. If I say something.
Has joined the meeting.
Hi, Philip. Well, forgive me. I'm a little bit, as they say, nervous, but I'll see. So just to give an overview of what, as Janet said, I joined SILT last year as one of the EdTech advisors. We were 8, and we had so many, we had an intensive training about, okay, I'm going to switch off. Let me switch on my camera first.
Meeting information button, start video.
Can you all see me?
Yes, we can. Hi, Benedict.
Hi.
Yeah, we can see you.
How about I don't look terrible? So I'm going to switch off my screen reader here.
Voiceover off.
So that whenever people use chat, so you don't have to be, you won't be distracted. So what happened was, since I joined the SILT, we having attending trainings, and we've engaged with literatures on universal access and inclusion. And what, for me, as I was engaging, and I said to the team that I can hear what we are doing, and it's quite good that we should all try to formulate some sort of inclusion way of relooking the pedagogies of teaching and learning at the university, but this might be too much work. So what then the team and I thought was, okay, how about we come up with a webinar where we're going to give the folks or the colleagues a bit of information about UDL and social justice, and then afterwards trying to figure it out from what will be presented in these 2 webinars. The second one, it will be next week around the same time, but now we'll be looking at the practical implementation of some of the UDL as far as technology is concerned. So what we thought was, how about we come up with a webinar where we can all come up with what could be our minimum standard that would be applicable to UCT and different faculties, because taking UDL as it is, and I'm trying to bring it to our context, we might not achieve it because we might feel that it's too much work, and we don't have time and resources, as is always the case with disabilities. So Phil, if you can put the first, the slides, PowerPoint slides. So Philip, as he is my colleague, so he'll be working with me, and Yaku should be here also. If I don't know if she's around.
Yes, I am, Benny.
Okay,
Thank you.
Molo. So I'll be running this webinar with the two of them. So Phil, let me know if you have. Oh, now my screen is, my voiceover is off.
Voiceover.
You can let me know if the slides are on.
Yes, so as he's sharing, we're just waiting for it to display on the screen.
Okay, no problem.
On Zoom us.
So with this one, I thought of looking at academic ableism and how, because as part of transforming the university,
Zoom us containing Windows.
is re-looking at academic ableism and how it
System dialog. Zoom us has
manifests itself.
PowerPoint is off now.
Okay, manifests itself at the university. So to start with, for this webinar, my focus will be more around disability, inclusion, and social justice. But the nice thing about UDL is that it does not necessarily focus on persons with disability, as you will see as you go along, that UDL, it kind of breaks that binary between the disabled and undisabled. So since I think 2001, when the Education White Paper 6 was published, which promoted inclusion within institutions of higher learning, many of us, persons with disability, have tried to enroll at the university, and we came to university thinking that we would be accommodated as the policy is saying, and as there's also a space for integrating or bringing in those who have been marginalized at institutions of higher learning. Second slide there, Philip. But then, however, as we have seen in the Fees Must Fall scenario in 2016, that kind of brought so many inequities that exist within the universities around decoloniality and whose voices. But then, as it's always been the case, disability was something that is been well neglected or always been sidelined, because sometimes people think that disability is, it's a lot of work to deal with, and also because some of us, as Janet said, I have 3 postgraduate qualifications. So when I talk about inclusion and marginalization, one could ask, what do I mean? Yet, if you go and look at this studies that have been done on students with disabilities, you will see the main key areas that keep on emerging, or themes, is isolation, social exclusion, and not being able to participate equal with some of your peers. So I thought with these webinars, slide 3, Philip, the first one would be to discuss the manifestation of academic ableism. In other words, how do we see it in our spaces, and how does it manifest, and what could be done about it? And then secondly, bring in the universal design model to try and bring a change to how we frame and outline academic discourses. And all of this, I thought, would be to promote or even to bring in social justice within the academic space, which I think all of the transformative movements, that's what they are planning to do. For now, then before we go, I think now we're going to have a little bit activity about academic ableism. I think Luntu will lead us to this activity, and then from there I'll come in with my panel, with my panelist. So Luntu, over to you. Oh, Phil.
Hello, everyone. My sincere apologies. I'm having some sound issues, but you'll notice in the chat there's the link to a Mentimeter, as well as the code to put in has been provided. So over the next 5 or so minutes, we would like you to give a few responses, so even one if you so wish, on what academic ableism means to you. And after that, after the 5 or so minutes are up, Yakuluntu will share the responses with us. Thanks, everyone.
Currently unmute.
So Phil, did you read out the question? Because the whole purpose is for inclusion. So I know I always emphasize that people must read. And now because I'm speaking and I know what's the question, but I think we might, for the purpose of recording, there might be some who could be like me, might not be able to understand the question. So did you read out the question loud so that everyone can understand the question?
My apologies. So the question is, what does academic ableism mean to me?
Thanks, Phil.
Thanks, Benedict.
Currently unmute.
Luntu, I'm not sure if you'll be able to read some of the comments as they pop up because they sound a bit more quiet or.
Yes, I don't know if it's me, but I'm not seeing any responses yet.
Okay.
I did enter one, so I don't know what's wrong with the setting,
What does
maybe.
academic ableism mean to me? Zoom us.
Yeah, I've entered 3, so I'm not sure what's happening.
Yeah, I've also entered about 3 or 4.
Everyone. Glenda Cox to every.
Maybe it's worth refreshing the page.
I think it's just the sharing rights that Luntu has at the moment, because I created the mentee, so I'm seeing them come up. So
Can you read, maybe read them out, Phil? Maybe.
I'm happy to. So actually, let me share a screen. Can everybody see the screen?
Yeah.
Yes.
So the question. So just repeat. The question was, what does academic ableism mean to me? Some of the responses that came up, because it's a word cloud, so the most common word was exclusion. Then we also have lack of accessibility, lack of research, unconscious bias, limiting, one size fits all, normative assumptions, unfair. Someone mentioned not familiar with the term, which is great, because come the end of this session, I'm sure you won't be able to say that again. Dominant group only. Some of the I think some of the takeaways that we can get from this, that all in all, the central theme seems to be perpetuation of inequities in a multitude of formats.
Currently unmuted.
Thanks, Phil. That is so true. Academic ableism, by definition, if you can put the slide there, Phil, recognizes those inequities that exist within the academic space. But then what is also nice about it is that it gives us a chance to reflect and see the possibility of renegotiating how we formulate pedagogies or learning styles, even how we assess students. And to give a bit of a more meat to this, I have my panelists, illustrious panelists, who are going to be with me today. We were supposed to be 3, but I'm not sure where is Dr. McKinney. Probably Vic McKinney might join us later. The first one is Dr. Michelle Botta. She's a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Stellenbosch. She completed her PhD here at UCT in the disability studies, focusing on visual impairment and rehabilitation. And she has also an MPhil in, I think, gender studies, but also within the visual impairment. So you can see she's quite knowledgeable as far as visual impairment life is concerned. And I think even her current work evolves around visual impairment and identity. And then the other panelist of mine is a friend of mine also, Ikecheku, a PhD student, but also a course convener for the MPhil and the PhD. Ike, I think when I came to university, he was my only source or reliable source when it comes to accessibility and inclusion is concerned. When I came 2017 to do my PhD, I liaised more with him as far as accessibility, accessing the curriculum. So I can see that my panelists, they've got a wealth, knowledge and interest in disability inclusion and probably ways of dismantling this academic ableism. And
Hi, Benedict, sorry to cut it. It's Vic, I'm here.
Oh.
I just said struggle logging in. Philip helped me. Thanks.
Sorry,
So
welcome. How are you doing, Dr. Vic?
I'm good, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you. So Vic also has a PhD from this university. What I loved the most, I can see his bio, oh, sorry, Michelle has he's partially, no, she's blind now. If it's okay for me, Mish, to say so. And Vic, you said you are disabled from neck down, but you've managed to complete your PhD. But what is interesting about Vic's work is that he focused primarily on universal design. So what we're talking about, his research work, for his PhD research work, worked primarily more on this with a civil engineering student. So without any more waste of time, welcome my panelists. Let me start with you, Dr. Botta. What are some of the challenges that, or the barriers you encountered during your years, your undergrad and probably even postgrad as a student with visual impairment?
Thanks, Benedict, and yes, thanks everyone for the opportunity. It's lovely to with you this afternoon. Yes, to your question, I think, you know, for me, my work is very focused on disability and identity, and it is focused on disability and identity because I think of my own experience of progressive vision loss. I mean, you mentioned Michelle is partially sighted. No, she's blind now. And that's very accurate to my experience. I was someone who had far more vision when I started my undergraduate studies than I do now. And for me as a young person coming to university, I would say that, yes, I had access challenges, practical access challenges around accessing learning material and you know, being in large lecture theatres where people were projecting things onto screens and assuming that everyone in the room could see. And that was a challenge, certainly. Accessing materials and textbooks and read. Those things were really significant challenges to me. But one of the key things that I was really going through and facing that wasn't really noticed and wasn't really addressed in any way, and that I was having to make sense of, was my own identity, my own sort of, I guess, sense of myself and sense that I belonged and sense that I was accepted, which I think in one sense is something that most young people experience. But with a disability, I think, we come up against, we often come up against quite negative attitudes from others about who we are, who we can be. I remember being on university campus and using a white cane for one of the first times in my life and bumping into someone I knew who didn't know that I had a disability. And he said, "Oh, it's so great to see that you're here at university, even though you can't see, because, blind people can't learn." And this sort of just fell out of his mouth. I don't think he'd really thought about what he was saying, but that idea was there in him, blind people can't learn. And so for me, that was a major challenge. So even when, access was made for me, I remember a really intuitive and lovely lecturer who would always sort of explain things to me. But when she did that in the class, she would say, "For Michelle, the picture on the screen is blah, blah, blah," or "For Michelle." And yes, she was making it accessible for me, but she was also outing me in a way that was really uncomfortable for me, because by saying that, she was basically saying, like, for the different person in the room. And that was quite difficult as a young person who was also just trying to make sense of my own identity. So yeah, I think those internal identity-based issues for me were quite important.
Yep. And I'm quite more interested to what your friend said, that blind people can't learn. So as you heard that word, and now with your reflections and with your engagement with the curriculum, do you see some connections to what your friend was saying, or what do you make sense of? What can you make sense of that statement?
Yeah, I just for me, it felt like it spoke to a sort of, I guess, quite unconscious attitude that people might have about blindness. And I mean, I won't go into this because I can talk about it for hours, but blindness is very connected to ideas about knowledge or lack of knowledge. And we see that in literature and in philosophy. There's a lot of, blindness is often used as a metaphor for not knowing. Blindness, for example. And so I think we do, there is that idea, and it's deep-seated,
And for you, Dr. Vic, how difficult was it for you to access the institutions of higher learning?
Thanks, Benedict. I think access, depending where you are, I think a higher campus is difficult. Because of the nature, it was built against the side of a mountain. So for someone who uses a wheelchair, access to a lot of places or to get one from one building to another is really difficult or impossible. And then also moving between campuses, it's very steep. So yeah, and I just wanted to clarify what the focus of my PhD was. I was looking at how we're preparing students in terms of higher learning or tertiary learning, how we're preparing students to develop an inclusive society. So I specifically looked at civil engineering in terms of civil engineers are the first step towards developing our built environment. So what are students learning or not learning? That nothing is changing. We've had policy since the 90s about building regulations and accessibility, but things are remaining the same. People, with wheelchair users and other people with disabilities aren't visible in society because we cannot access it. So my focus was on that, specifically, how are students being prepared? And that was where we really found lacking. I'll carry on, just stop me if I got a bit much.
Yes, because that's I think one of the final questions that I have said is for you and Ike to discuss that, because also his worked around kind of similar topic, and I think that's just where I would like us to, towards the end, when we reflect on where we are now as UCT. But so for now, it sounds to me as if your access to the academia, your challenge was mainly around physical accessibility. But then for someone that said, I think you said you use your chin or your mouth to.
So I'm paralyzed from the shoulders down, and I use. Sorry. I use I control the movement of my wheelchair with my chin. So many people have probably seen a motorized wheelchair, somebody sitting, and normally people have movement in one hand or one arm, and I might have a control by their hand to guide their chair. I use my chin. So if it's, you know, just going up and down over roads or a bumpy surface, means my chin bounces up and down on like a little joystick that I use to steer. So yeah, accessibility is in smooth roads, and being able to move from one level to another one is key for me. And
how did that impact your learning?
For some courses, it was difficult. I think I was fortunate that I did, you know, people were willing to change venues. Also, some of the lifts in some of the buildings were too small for my wheelchair. I had to find alternate ways to go around and to move around, find alternate routes. And then traveling from one building across campus to another building it can be very difficult and bumpy. So I can lose a lot of time. Those are the key issues in terms of moving around.
Okay, and Ike, let me bring you in the conversation. Your thoughts about what you're hearing now, and specifically for you, for someone who is working with students with disabilities, I assume in most cases, how much of the barriers that students with disabilities experience are you aware of?
Thank you, Jabu. Thank you for that question. I mean, I came into UCT from around 2011, and it has been a remarkable journey, you know, since then. I used to convene the postgraduate diploma in disability studies, and in that program, we used to have students with disabilities who also come on to do the program. So that was where my first encounter with challenges which students with disabilities encounter became manifest. And from that area, I started looking at even other students. So the one thing that was very striking in terms of barriers to the curriculum for students with disabilities and other students also was that the university was heavily inclined towards the writing form of engagement. So that means students are able to engage with the curriculum, express themselves. It was heavily skewed towards writing. So then, but with students with disabilities, some of them are more able to grasp and engage with the curriculum. If it's students that are hearing impaired, we talk about getting the written feedback. Or students with visual impairment, talk about they get the audio feedback and the rest of it. So that got me thinking around the barriers that these different ways of learning are not really catered for in the design of the curriculum. So the other aspect was then, I now realized that when we design the curriculum, the accessibility is not really something that features strongly in the design stage, so at the early stages of the design of the curriculum. And that when we talk about accessibility, it's usually after the curriculum has been designed, then we now think about, okay, how can we accommodate students who are blind? How can we accommodate students who are hearing impaired? So that's the other aspect of the challenges that I found that needed addressing. Then when we're talking about UDL, Universal Design for Learning, and we say it's, you know, beyond just looking at students with disabilities. I noticed the other aspect in my undergraduate course that I convene and teach on, the other aspect of language. So students who come onto the course and their first language is not English. I was able to observe that my students who speak Tosa, you know, mostly they were able to understand concepts a bit more better when they're able to speak in their own language. So these are part of the challenges that I encountered. But the core of it was in the consideration of accessibility at the design stage of the curriculum, not at when the curriculum is being fully designed, and then we'll now talk about thinking about inclusion of how do we include students with disabilities. Yeah, thanks.
And Dr. Bueta, so When it comes to accessing your materials, you mentioned materials were made accessible for you. I have with me now, I have 3 Braille papers around me. And because they are Braille, the other one has, I think, let me check, 4 pages. But I'm sure in an actual normal page to be just 1 page. So I'm thinking more around when you engage with your learning, your reading, and even reading particularly. Did any way the load of the curriculum and with your condition made it a bit more hard for you to perform to your level, to a best of your ability? Yep.
Yeah, I think, and even just comparing, my situation with yours shows up, I think, the diversity of needs and the, we would both call ourselves blind, but our needs are completely different. I'm not a Braille user. I never learned Braille. I didn't go to a special school. Braille was never an option. It was never offered to me. And so I think, there's often an assumption about how people, like what blind people need. For me, my work had to either be scanned into a computer electronic form, which takes time. So everyone, there's always the sense, for me as a student with a disability, there was always the sense of having to catch up, because my class were all handed the politics reader, a reader as thick as your, thicker than your arm. And they were handed it into their hands and off they could go. And I would sometimes have to wait a week or 2. So the sense was always like, everyone's ahead of me. Everyone's ahead of me. I've got to catch up. I've got to catch up. And other challenges around books that couldn't be converted, having to get people to come and read to me, which sounds like a solution, but it's in fact very draining to listen to a human being read at various levels of reading. Their reading ability varies as well. It can be quite, difficult to listen to. And so, there were a lot of challenges. I was still using magnification at the time as well, but the sort of really intense pain in my neck and shoulders from using a magnifying glass to read these thick textbooks, that you can't, you're actually having to bend down to read them because you can't lift them up. They're too heavy. So there are all these things that we maybe don't think of when we think about access, because people go, well, you've got the magnification and there's the book, off you go. But it's not always as simple as that.
Yeah, thank you. I think I can relate, because even with me, I remember first year coming to university, getting a course outline and going to the disability service, and then the lady said, look, I can only give you these readings, the rest need to go to the library. Bear in mind that my first year in the university, I don't have so many friends, so having to wait for my friend when he has time to go and search for the book. He's not also familiar with the library system, so it was a lot. We always have to ask for an extension. But for you, Dr. Vic, did you experience any difficulties with reading? Or
I think, and I like what Michelle says, is that, we're all individual. I think and you'll find other wheelchair needs similar to me, other wheelchair users who might be in a similar position to myself from the outside, but we'll have individual needs that are separate as well. And I think also the idea of playing catch up is very much a thing. And it takes me quite a while. I use assistive devices to write. I use voice recognition software. And I use assistive devices to type, etc. on my Word documents and my thesis and readings, etc. So it's also it's the background stuff. It's trying to getting in touch with librarians and following up, trying to get the right format or the right PDF or the right documents that are available. It's something that I could use. Electronic format's normally easier for me, or a recording of a meeting or something like that. So gaining access is kind of the behind the work. I'm sure yourself and Michelle have experienced something similar, just trying to find access to the right thing. So it's about catching up. I often say about disability, it's kind of like being in the river. Everybody else is on the shore walking along, and you're constantly in the river, just knee deep in water. And no matter how fast you go, you're always going to be wading through mud. It's just trying to catch up. That's kind of the feeling you kind of have about it.
True, true. But was there a way that disability issues could be addressed as far as this equity is concerned, or was it more of a done deal that this is the process and unfortunately there is no alternative? Has any one of the three of you tried to raise disability, reframing disability inclusion, or trying to work with, because I remember looking at Heidi's dissertation, one of her recommendations was that maybe lecturers, as part of the university policies, they could provide an extensions for students with visual impairment or something to that effect. But from as far as any one of you can answer is aware, has there ever been some way of readdressing this disability inclusion or addressing disability exclusion as far as academic participation is concerned?
If I could jump in. Sorry, Michelle, you're going to go? Go ahead, Michelle.
Okay, I just wanted to jump in just because you mentioned our friend and colleague, Prof. Heidi Lawrence from UJ, and her work. And thing that she said, and that she found in her work with students, which for me was so resonant, was that students almost expressed gratitude for the accommodations that they were given, rather than sort of asserting them as their rights to have accommodation. And just to say that I think, for me, if I look back at my younger self, my sort of 15 years ago self as a first year, I had no idea that I had rights as a person with a disability. I didn't know. So I couldn't advocate for myself because I didn't know that I could. And I did think, well, this is the system and you better just, fit in, make it work. Yes, it's harder, but, put your head down and get going. So looking back, if I could sort of zoom back to my younger self, I might tell her that there are, that there is a possibility to advocate for yourself, and things like, as Vic's example of, wading through the mud. If we're wading through the mud, then we need that extra time, we need the extensions, we need those accommodations. But I just feel that often, particularly perhaps younger people, and maybe I just see myself, I didn't know that I could ask and that I was allowed to. So
yeah, that's more like take it is or leave it. And for you, Vic,
I would agree with Michelle, and I'm, I think, the more elder statesman of the students on the panelists here. And so I'm used to a time, when just having a computer didn't have devices, and I would use a stick to type, put a stick in my mouth and type on the keyboard using that just to get through to Word documents for UNICE in the early 90s. So you very much appreciate what you have just being there. And it's great to see younger students come along and say, well, hang on, I need funds for personal assistance, and I need this and I need that, and kind of demanding their rights, which is great to see, and breaking new ground for the next generation. So that's encouraging. But I think a lot of it refers back to what Ike was saying. It's about getting things right at the design stage and also the transformation. One of the key findings that came out of my thesis was that, and a quote from one of the lecturers is that, behind the other issues of transformation, behind race and gender, disability is the forgotten orphan. And I'm busy working on a paper that is kind of the title. So in the transformation issues, there's commitment by the university as a whole, and kind of in what they stand for, and it's correct. But when you get down to department level and lecturers, disability is lost. And so, like the head of the civil engineering department, he says, Vic, I'd love to include disability, it's important, but I don't know where to fit it in with 1,000 other things I want to fit into a very busy course. So at a very hands-on grassroots level, if you like, or classroom level, lecturers need a support from places like CILT and CHED, etc., to develop a curriculum that is disability inclusive. He says, quoting the head of department as well, he says, what questions do I ask about disability? How do I mark them? And who does the marking, and how do I do that? How do I incorporate it into my program? And that's where we can support. But also for that to be driven at design stage and transformation, to say we need disability involvement here. We need it to be an outcome, an exit level outcome of our exams and of what we're producing, what we expect of our students. If we're expecting social justice, how does that fit in with all the attributes we want of our graduates? How do we fit disability in, and where does it take place? Thanks.
Thank you. Ike, your work also focused around similar work. Could you tell us more about what came out of your work?
Yes, thanks, Benedict. So part of my work was looking into how disability issues is included in curriculum, in undergraduate curriculum at the university. And part of the information that came out of that was that, linking to what Vic was saying, the support that is given to academics in terms of looking at, okay, how can they redesign their curriculum in order to be able to make it more inclusive, okay? And in that aspect, the first thing that came out was that, has there even been a mind shift that's happened? That means, has there been a shift in an academic's view of, oh, you know what, is actually important for my curriculum to be inclusive, to be able to allow students who learn differently to be able to access my curriculum fully, okay? So not just being able to access a PowerPoint, but being able to engage with the content, make meaning out of it, just like every other student is able to co-create knowledge and all that is required for a student to succeed in university. So he's looking at, okay, how can we effect a mind change in academics at the university? Then coupled with that is, okay, how do we then support them to design the curriculum for change? And the third aspect was that it actually happens, there should be a growing community of practice of this kind of endeavors so that academics are able to relate, engage with each other, see how inclusive practices are done. Because a study that came before mine actually found that there were academics at the university that were actually already doing the inclusion, but is that the recognition is not yet there, and the support needed to be more for them to be able to carry it out. And the university has been making strides in it. I mean, even there's a program called the LAB program. Is the new academics that come into the university. So in the induction program, the university of Cape Town actually now started introducing accessibility to new academics, at least frame it into their induction process, so that they can start thinking around the inclusion of accessibility into the curriculum.
Then I will ask you, was it an inclusion or was it more of a retrofit?
Yes, so that is an area that is more of more challenging, because that is when the mind shift comes in. Because if the mind shift doesn't come in, then what you find is that you start seeing like tick boxes, like a retrofitting. So that means, what by retrofitting? That means is that what I spoke about, that if the inclusion doesn't happen at the design stage of the curriculum, what happens is that we move into a retrofitting form. And what's retrofitting form? That means example is that you have a PDF, you scanned it into Vula, and you scanned it as an image into Vula. Okay, you do not think about, okay, a student with visual impairment who uses screen reader, can they access this PDF? It's only afterwards now start thinking, oh, we actually need to send this PDF to disability services to be able to convert it to a readable format so that a student with visual impairment is able to access it. So that is the one of the current challenges which we have, in that at the moment we're transitioning from the retrofitting paradigm, if I can say so, into looking into a design stage, accessibility in the design stage. And that is where I think we're always linking to universal design for learning, because that's what actually what is actually endorsing.
Which would be my final question before I allow our audience to ask few questions. I'll just allow maybe three questions or two. But for me, the question that remains with me that anyone could start, is there a way that both of you thinking, sitting here with me virtually, when you look at your journey as far as academic is concerned, how do you think your life could have been much better? In other words, what would have made your life easier as a student with disability? Whoever wants to start can.
Yeah, I'll start. If someone wants to jump in, please go ahead. Following up what Michelle and what Ike have been saying, and particularly about the mind shift. So to condense it briefly, my study found that university, like most institutions, has a three-pronged approach to disability. The first is to, well, the one is to increase the number of staff and students with disabilities. And I think they've been making good headway in that. The second is to make the campus accessible for those staff and students with disabilities. And I think that the UCT can be commended on good progress in trying to, in making an effort to get that. And there's been a lot of retrofitting, a lot of money spent on that because it wasn't done at the design stage for campus. So it's working on that. And I think there's a commitment to that. The third thing is including disability as a topic across all disciplines, because you know, we constantly produce graduates across all disciplines who know nothing about, and I'm talking from doctors, lawyers, engineers, health workers, economists, our businessmen. People are graduating and we want social justice. They're lacking social justice regarding disability because they don't know how to incorporate disability into everyday practice and how to accommodate people with disabilities in the economy. So it will remain an add-on. It's not in thinking in everyday life. And until we do that, until we have a constant presence. And as Ike says, you know, you'll meet one or two lecturers in a department who are including us. Oh, they come and lecture and they'll bring you lectures. But when they move departments or they move somewhere else, that stops. And we need that to carry on. It should be a formalized structural thing, like disability. And that's kind of what's lacking. We haven't moved from it being an add-on or a nice to have to being an essential. And that's what needs to change so that all students graduate with a sense of accommodating people with disabilities, and there's a greater presence in, I think, in mind and in practice. I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you.
Zoom us has new
Ike?
So it's actually following up on what Vika said. The university has made good progress, especially even with our disability services at the university. They've really been a good support structure, you know, for students. But we found out that it needs to go beyond that. There's so much else that needs to be done. So it needs to go to a stage whereby departments, divisions, academics are also involved in this. And that's where you see, because like Vic was saying, you want, if students who graduate at the university don't get disability inclusion, they will end up perpetuating the same thing in the different sectors of the society which they find themselves. Engineers will go on building products and services that don't include, you know, that are not accessible. Architects will go on building buildings, bridges, and the rest of it. Lecturers and curriculum developers will go on building courses that are not. So Vic is very, very, what he said is very, very important in that when disability is included in the curriculum as part of the wealth of diversity that is happening, then you now have graduates who are sensitized to this, and when they go into their various areas of work in the society, then you now gradually start seeing changes happening. And I will link again to UDL. The beautiful thing about UDL is that it now moves beyond even disability. So that means you have a situation whereby disability is included with other forms of diversity.
Thank you. Mish, final thoughts?
I mean, it's just really reiterating what Ike and Vic have said, which I think is just so crucial. But for me, it is also that streamlining between the disability services and the various departments. I mean, I will just end with, you know, when I was first studying, when I was a young person, I would go to my lecturers in the first class and say, hello, my name is Michelle. I'm visually impaired, but you don't have to do anything about it. Because I was so, you know, in that space of not wanting to be a bother to anyone.
Zoom us has new window.
Yeah, so, that streamlining, I think that's needed, so that it's not just the disability services and the student trying to make it work, but that there's a broader situation where more of the role players are involved.
Thank you so much, colleagues. I'm not sure if there's any comments on the chat. Yaku, is there any?
Butler to everyone. Please excuse me, colleagues. I have to leave for an.
I'm not sure if there's any
Lauren Butler has left
comments on the chat or any questions. I'll just take one or two questions. Philip and Yaku, is there any question for Vic and Michelle?
Okay, thank you, Jabulani. Okay, so there is a comment from Desiree that says this is an age-old political question. What is the most appropriate term to use in current times for people with disabilities? Is this an acceptable term? If so, who is it referring to? Is the understanding that UDL by design is only for this designated group or more?
Very good questions. The last one, no, it's not only for this group.
Philip Dambisaya has left the.
It's for, that's the whole UDL tried to dismantle that binary between this and them. But as for the term, I'm not sure Michelle or Vic, who wants to answer that question, the PC for disability and people with disability.
You know, there's some very strong feelings about this in the disability sector, and I think you're going to get different perspectives from different people. So I will give you my personal view, which may not be, which may not be universally agreed with. My feeling personally is that we need relationships that are robust and rich and open, where we can talk about disability in a way that is not being hampered by worrying about terminology. And my get into the terminology story, we stop talking to each other. My feeling is to listen very carefully to how a person describes themselves, to ask. I say I'm blind. I'm very comfortable with that term. For me, it's quite a political way to describe myself, and I've got an identity politics around that word, but others might not be so comfortable. So I think it's an individual to individual thing, and it's about relationships, and it's about listening to each other. And again, that's just my opinion, and there are others who hold to certain terminology rules, and that's what they do.
Yeah, same here. I don't subscribe to. I often say, just call me whatever that you think will not make me feel uncomfortable. If I think there's a problem.
Thanks, and thanks, Michelle. I would agree with Michelle. And my 2 cents worth. I was asked this question by the colleague who was busy working on an article the other day about what the correct term is. So Desiree, just in terms of, I mean, we can say people with disabilities, there's disabled people is also acceptable. I know in the States and in South Africa, we tend to talk about people with disabilities. In the UK, or I think about Australia and the UK and America as well, they talk about disabled people. I think in South Africa, we definitely had the idea was to put the person first, and I think that was kind of symbolic in terms of human rights and what the country's been through. So it's a person with a disability. So either of those terms are fine. I think some things you just stay away from are words like cripple and handicap, and if you can do that, then that's fine. But also ask. I think it's a good question to ask. And if I can jump to a question I saw by Reza Daniels, who says, I have a question. What are the examples of immediate interventions we can implement in our courses right now to reduce academic ableism? The best thing is just increase the presence of people with disabilities. Get them to lecture, get them in the class. I think for myself, who lectures with a disability, my presence in front of a classroom in a wheelchair has a profound impact on students as a teacher, because I'm there educating. In that sense, I have an expert in my own field and also what my experiences are. And I've learned how to convey that. I've got better at that. But have the presence, because then it just makes a huge impact. It can have a profound impact on students in any discipline, of course, anything, to get the input from someone with disability. And it also empowers me as someone with disability who's now getting the opportunity to tell you what I need and how I need it. as opposed to being prescribed to all the time. So I think just increased presence and increased interactions with disability as much as possible. I think that's lacking in general across our society. Thanks. Yes. Okay, one question. I'll carry on as well, actually, just to say what Ike was mentioning about disability service. And at UCT, we have an amazing disability service. They've helped me get devices, they've helped me fund it. They've been absolutely incredible to help me arrange extra time for my exams, etc. And I would imagine, I don't know offhand, but I would say it's pretty one of the top in the country. And what we mustn't get confused by when we talk about disability issues, to outsiders often say, well, you've got the MPhil and you've got the PhD in disability and you've got a disability service. You say, that's fine. What we need to drive for now is increased funding, like real funding, and increased programs around disability research. So that can be incorporated into the academy. Otherwise, as Ike says, we're not educating the next generation on how to incorporate disability into everyday practice. And until that changes, in 20 years' time, we'll be saying the same things, that, well, we're still increasing staff and students with disability and trying to retrofit campus, but our students are not leaving any wise on how to incorporate people with disabilities across the board and into an inclusive society that we're trying to develop in South Africa in terms of the NDP, and of course in terms of the world in meeting the Sustainable Development Goals. So we actually have to have disability across all topics. How do we include people in the economy? What are our students at the Graduate School of Business learning? What are architects? What are our learners learning how to incorporate people with disabilities to access justice? Because it's a huge sore point in our country, ranging from abuse to vulnerable populations, especially considering the state we have in terms of abuse and femicide in our country. It's a real issue at societal and grassroots level. How are we changing that, and how is it improving for people with disability across the board to be included in society? So I think it goes to extending to research and supporting programs that are inclusive, not just looking at disability services, but what's happening at a teaching and education and learning level. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks. If I can jump in quickly from what Vic has been saying. So what he talked about was part of what they call direct exposure. That means students are directly exposed to a person. Now that is a very powerful, subtle change that happens. You know why? Because a lot of times you find that there's anxiety that surrounds, when we talk about disability. So part of the enabling characteristic of having persons with disability in lecturing as students is that it starts to dispel that, or it starts to reduce that anxiety. I definitely know that's happened for me because my background was in information technology. I had not engaged with disability before, but through direct exposure, working with persons with disabilities, and you start finding that persons with disabilities are human beings just like you yourself. And you start finding more areas of commonality than areas actually of difference. Then to the question of the question about how you describe persons with disability, I could not agree more with Michelle and Vic. It's an individual thing. When I did my study, I found a student with visual impairment who said they don't want to be called a person with a person with disability, because we're all different. So it's engage with the person on a personal level and find out that relationship Michelle spoke about, find out how they want to be described, and then you take it from there. What you have to understand is that the tendency to want to disability is in a continuum. Things continually change, so you have to continually engage. Of course, as you continually to engage, you learn lessons that you can apply to situations in which you meet. Yeah, I just wanted to include that. Thanks.
Thanks. And also extending what Ike and Michelle have said, there's a lot of disability on campus that is not seen. And I've had quite a few students in the more recent years, just before COVID, healthcare students, engineering students, commerce, etc., who have had a baby be in the range of Asperger's syndrome or had some psychosocial issues, have been through traumas. One that went through a hijacking, was on or mugging on campus. One went through experienced chronic fatigue syndrome, and these are real disabilities that we are not necessarily obvious. I'm in a wheelchair. And Michelle, maybe it's after interacting with us, you can, my disability is naked. I often say you can see straight away I have a disability, but a lot of it isn't. And people often with the invisible disabilities express that they have a harder time trying to convince people that they're disabled, whether it's lecturers or whatever, that they're not taken seriously because their disability isn't obvious as we've kind of learned to perceive it. So I think we need to keep our minds open as to what disability is and how it affects someone differently and how they identify with themselves, and just what they struggle with at a functioning level at any given stage. Yeah, thanks.
Oh, thank you so much, Tim. I don't know what happened there. I was speaking and I didn't know what happened. Thank you so much, Michelle, Vic, for coming. I highly appreciate your time. I'm so sorry for what happened. My battery died. I don't know how is it possible because it always alert me. But thank you so much for coming. And I certainly hope that colleagues have learned one or two things about disability. And now that with where we are going as far as implementing UDL, they will know what sort of barriers we are trying to dismantle and break away from. So thank you so much once again.
From Desiree Woody to everyone, unmute. Desiree.
Thanks.
Meeting information button. You are using mute my audio.
Can we talk?
Rita Daniels has met.
So now, am I still audible, right?
Yes, you're audible.
Oh, thank you. So now we're going to move to the next part of our webinar. Nakuluntu, I think even Philip disappeared also because I heard
Phil's, I think Phil's here.
Oh, is he here?
And it's confusing because I'm logged in as
yes, yeah, exactly.
I had struggled logging in. Apologies for that.
So we should be on slide 7. Now that from our panel discussion, I would like us to go through to equity and reflect more. Slide 7, equity and equality. What we have seen and heard. So I'll try to be quick because we have already run out of time. We're almost towards the end of our webinar. I don't want to waste more on your time. So what has been addressed so far, it sounds like it's the whole notion between equality and equity. We were all included. That's why I asked Ike the question about is the retrofitting, because that equality means that you just bring everybody together and you try to squeeze them and make sure that they become part, regardless of whether that part still continues to marginalize them or not. So with what we are hoping to do with SILT and us as the ETA, working with lecturers, is to promote equity, where we look at the person, or the plan is to look at the person as an individual and how can we, what's a way of ensuring that they access the academic inclusively without any hassle. And the next slide that Luntu, for us, we relook at the social justice, and we, as you might have seen on the invite, we thought of using Nancy Fraser's idea of participatory parity, because with her dimensions of social justice, she gave us a lens in which we could really look at how we distribute all of these elements, or how do we distribute access to, who has access to education, what sort of resources, as we might have seen, we must have heard in our conversation with my panelists, that resources were there, but there were still other barriers. Recognition, people could have recognized us that we're disabled, we need extra care, and then with representing our voice, I don't think our voices were that much heard. So we see with this Nancy Fraser's framework, it gave us a lens in which we could reevaluate and look at how far as when we relook at equity. Do we distribute or do we recognize, or even do students have a voice in what they are learning? Next slide. So as a result of that, we advocate for UDL with its a principle that promote flexible ways of teaching and ways of instructions. There are three principles: multiple means of representation, action, and engagements. What that literally means that as I'll make reference, I'll keep on going back to my panel, because I think they gave us a bit of anecdotal evidence of how things we could have done things a bit more differently, and inclusion and this isolation would have not existed. So when we, like for instance, Michelle spoke about, she and I make reference about the time that we need to wait for getting our materials in a right form. Surely if the curriculum was designed in a way that there's a bit of flexibility in how we could still access learning while we're still waiting for materials, we could still even be assessed. We don't have to, if the closing date for assignments is closer and we're still waiting for course materials. So UDL framework give us a chance to, or give us pedagogical ways of ensuring that every student, regardless of their abilities, are able to access information. And now the final question is, how do we, because UDL originate from the high school. So ever since I joined the CILT, the plan has always, for me, has been, how can we make sure that UDL is applicable to our UCT context? There are a couple of, maybe handful of readings around UDL as far as high institutions of learning is concerned. And we have so many faculties here. The question is, then how do we work with lecturers to reframe the way they've planned their academic? So UDL also give us that framework, flexibility, where, as I've said it before, it's not only about how, it's not only about giving students textbooks, but it's also allowing them to provide how you plan your course. You can rework and look at who is in your class and try to work with your student and see what is the best way that they can still access your course materials, even course objectives, but more working towards their abilities. So folks, I think because of time, we were hoping that we were going to have the last group discussions, but now I don't think, because of time,
To everyone.
it's
Anyone feel free to email me for
it's already 1:15, and we were supposed to end at 1:15. I mean, it's already 17 or so past 1. So what I would rather recommend is that you can use, is it possible, Luntu, that they could use the Jamboard to reflect more on what they have heard today, so that when we meet next week, because what's going to happen next week, Ike and I, we will be looking more at the practical ways of implementing UDL frameworks in your classroom or even digitally. So most of our work will reflect more on the accessibility of Amatuba, as well as how UDL could assist as far as inclusion and participation is concerned. So colleagues, I am so sorry that we took a bit of time. I sincerely apologize, but I hope you have learned one or two things, and you'll go back to your drawing board and rethink academic ableism and rethink of including students that you might have not thought that they might be interested in learning. So from me, thank you so much for listening to me, and hope that everything went according to your expectations. If not, I'm so sorry. Next time I'll try to up my game. Thank you, Janet and Tula.
Hey, Benedict, thank you very much. Now, I think we've still got a few minutes, so we could wrap up now and have any last words from people. I really think it was incredibly valuable, and the panelists gave us fantastic inputs and insight. I think from the comments, I've seen a lot of appreciation for you guys. So thank you very much. I don't know if any of you would like to have a last word before we close the meeting, and maybe we can reconvene. Encourage as many of you as possible to join us next week, where Benedict says we'll go into a bit more detail on practical stuff. Any greetings or last words from you, Vic?
Just thank you very much for the invite. It's an in-depth topic. I mean, we've scratched the surface, but it's been great to have the opportunity, and nice to see EK and Michelle again. So it's great to see not old faces, but faces we've known before.
Thank you, panel, for such an enlightening
Thanks, Vic.
Thank you. Presentation. There is much to reflect on.
Yeah, so for me, yes, thank you very much for this opportunity. And in fact, going to one of the questions which the participants asked about what can be done, I think what the SILT, UCT SILT is doing is actually part of that process.
Yeah.
In engaging in universal design for learning, working on pilot courses to be able to actually implement it. I think it's a very bold step, very bold process that SILT is taking. I really want to commend them on this effort. And
hello to everyone. Thank you, panel, for the informative session. Zoom has new window.
Thank you, Ike, for those words. We'll try keeping bold, and we're just appreciating the support we get from our colleagues in disability studies, particularly, as well as disability services. And I think of trying to make what universal design can offer into practical and applicable, that's our big challenge. So yeah, maybe we can join up for more on that conversation next week. Okay. Yep. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here, and we look forward to seeing you in future encounters.